YouTubers, this is Joe from ArtAlienTV. Another quick game of interplanetary ice going on here. Back to Mars, back to Gale Crater, and we're going right all the way back to Sol 25. Now, obviously, this was the 25th day that the Curiosity was on Mars after it landed there in 2012. Not quite a long time ago now. Now, I've been going over some of the really early images because some of these are actually better quality than the later ones that a lot of us are looking at now. And this is the main image we're going to be looking at today, very quickly. And we have a double-headed statue here. The other image, which is also from Sol 25, is this one. We have another little statue just here. Now, these just look like rocks initially, until you zoom in and take a closer look. So that's what we're going to do. I always look in closer, and I always try and pick images that are clear, because a lot of these images are quite dark and distorted, whereas these are quite bright. So you can actually see some detail here, not amazing detail, but some. And obviously my job is to show you in greater detail without destroying the image and making it worse than it already is. Not easy to do. Okay, so let's have a look at the folder. The folder right here. Oh, I'm also going to compare these to some of the other things I found in the area as well, because they're quite similar to some other things I found. And there's been one or two interesting comments about some of the things I found recently, which kind of got my imagination going. And this is helping to solidify some of my theories about what this area was before the giant cataclysm on Mars. Okay, now here's the first one. Let me show the raw image first. Now, where's the raw image? The raw image is here. Here we go. Now, all I've done is enlarge this. I haven't done anything else to it. And early on in the rover mission, they used to leave the border of the image on there. See, so you've got this black border on the side. Later images are all cropped, so you can actually stitch them together easily. Here it is. I'm just going to zoom in. There we have a double-headed statue part. Now, this isn't very large. I would say this is only a matter of probably about 5 inches tall. I could be wrong. It could be 8, or it could be sort of 4. So it's somewhere in that ballpark. Can't tell you exactly because there's no scale for this. And you can see it's not very clear. You can see a head here and another one here facing to the left, attached to this kind of little plinth-like part. Now, this is probably, like many of the things I've found, attached to something below or broken off something that was a larger kind of monumental piece of some sort, like some kind of multiple statue, or perhaps a fountain, or perhaps some burial kind of figurines or something like that. Now, okay, let's have a look at the enhancements. I've got a meme that I've done. Now, here's the first version of the meme I did, which I put up on my group yesterday, and I put it in a few groups on Facebook. Unfortunately, when you brighten this, it gets very reflective, which says to me this may not actually be rock at all. This may actually be bronze or some other kind of metallic material here. It's hard to say, but this is quite reflective. As soon as you brighten it up, it gets very bright. So you've got to be very careful how much brightness you add to it. And you can see here that the top of it's quite flat. At the top, we've got these kind of a straight, flat top. We've got a head here. We've got a long nose coming down here, which is rather odd, but not dissimilar to others I found. And we've got 2 eyes. You can see a mouth with teeth here, just here. It's pretty vague. You can see teeth at the bottom there. And another head next to it with a little nose sticking out just there. You've got an eye there, and you've got a mouth here. A cheek coming, like a smiling kind of face with quite a prominent cheekbone and quite a flat head. Not a great deal of detail there. I appreciate that. But I did do a slightly darker one, and you can actually see the shapes better. You can actually see the details slightly better, because when you darken it, the contrast pushes it back a bit, but also pushes out the lighter parts, so you can see the shape of it better around here, the chin coming round, nose, 2 eyes, Rather strange. Now this, of course, is probably damaged. Well, it is damaged. You can see that. This looks like it was joined to something, and as one or two commenters did say when I put this up on Facebook, there may be another face or head joined facing this way, behind. You can kind of see like a nose sticking out here, and perhaps like a silhouette of another head. So this may be a triple head. So it may be three, but it's impossible to say because we can't see round that side. So there we are, that was it really. There it is in the context there with what's, there's not a lot around it, but there is another statue not that far away, so I'm just about to show you. So there we are, that was that one. I'll put clips of these images in at the end like I always do, so you can take your screenshots if you want. Now the other one is this one. Here's a raw clip. Now that doesn't look like much either, does it? But when you find so many of these, like I have, you start to get an eye for them, and you start to realise what sort of size they are and what sort of shape a lot of these are. And a lot of them that I've found seem to be warrior type statues of small figurines or statuettes, I should say, that are broken off or maybe buried, and we're just seeing the very top. And now this doesn't look much. In fact, when you zoom in, but if you look really carefully, you can see an eye here, see a nose and a mouth here. And this is a helmet. So this is a person in a helmet, and you can actually see where the helmet comes around. It's very vague, I know, but you do get used to these images when you look at them for long enough, like I have. And this is that same image enlarged, and you can see there's not a lot of detail here, but you can see an eye, a nose, a mouth, and you can see that at the edge of the helmet here as it comes round. That's the edge of the face, and the top of the helmet comes up to a slight point and curves back like this. It's almost like a sort of medieval style helmet like you would see on Earth, perhaps. And it's very similar, in fact, to one that I found a while ago, which is this one, which has a similar shape to it. Now, this is the one you'll see if you watch Mars documentaries on YouTube about anomalies on Mars. They always show this clip, or they show one or two of my other clips. In fact, always every single documentary you'll see that's been made in the last few years, last sort of couple of years or so, will either have this in it or one of my other clips that I found, like the lizard or that kind of thing. And they never credit me for it. And I've noticed also now that Ancient Aliens are using my clips and in their opening sequence now. But of course I was on Ancient Aliens and I gave them permission to use some of the things I found. Now of course I don't own these images, but I do own my enhanced images. I don't own the raw images, they belong to everybody of course. But it's amazing how many people don't credit you for stuff on YouTube. They just don't actually care who found any of this stuff and where it was sourced from. So there we are. There's also this thing, I don't know if you've seen this, a lot of you, this is a previous video I did about a week ago, actually a few days ago. This is the jug on Mars, check that out if you haven't seen it. This was uploaded on the 23rd, so yeah, about a week ago. Okay, so check that out. This is an astonishing find. I've sent this to all the press and none of them will print it. Now, this video, this one here, I sent this to the press and a lot of them did print it. It was in Daily Mail and it was in, I think it was in some of the quite large online news sites. And once you get in the large ones, then everyone else copies it and then they just run with the story all over the world. Now, I have a huge mailing list actually of companies, that media companies, and over the years I've had a lot of stories published, but now they're absolutely not going for it. So it seems I've been blacklisted from the press for some reason, and they will not show this jug. This is a raw image and you can see it's a jug with a handle. They will not print it. And I actually said in the email, are you brave enough to print this story because no one else is? Hoping that might goad them into printing it, but none of them have. And I sent it 3 times to hundreds of outlets, 3 times over, all over the world, from China to America to Europe to Australia, you name it, all over the world, and no one will print it. So, but what these things did remind me of, in many ways, we have small warrior statuettes or statues that are broken. Now this one's lying on its side. A lot of them are upright. A lot of them are just sitting on the sand. Now, of course, a lot of people have said in the comments, how could these things possibly still be intact if it was wiped out, if Mars was wiped out millions of years ago? Well, we don't know how long ago it was wiped out. There may have been many cataclysms on Mars, probably from Olympus Mons, but also nuclear war, that kind of thing. We really don't know. And a lot of these things may be quite recent, or were just buried in loads of sand until recently, which protected them, which is why they're intact. That would protect you against radiation and erosion, being buried in sand and soil, which is very sticky. And of course, a storm could have uncovered this. This could have been buried for thousands of years. Here's the enhancement. That could have been buried for thousands and thousands of years, perhaps even millions of years. Until a recent storm, this could have all been covered in sand, and it could have just blown away. And the same goes for this thing. Now, what someone did say the other day on my channel was that they're like terracotta warriors, and I thought, yeah, they are. Now, if you don't know anything about the Terracotta Army, look it up. I'll put a link for this below. This is from Wikipedia, and this is one of the best quality images you'll see of the Terracotta Army. Let's have a look at it close up. Now, this did remind me, actually, of some of these ridges you see in Gale Crater. You see these long ridges, and they've got statues at the bottom of the ridge. It's a different scale. These are very condensed. There's 6,000 of these figurines, or statues, I should say. These are life-size. And there's also horses and chariots and all sorts of other things, other animals as well, like we see in Gale Crater. So if you imagine this on Mars, in Gale Crater, but with less statues, say hundreds or maybe 1,000, but spread out and not quite so densely together in columns like this, but say spaced out a bit more, say one here, then one here, then one here, then one here, and then another sort of 10 along here, then another 10. That's more like what we have on Mars. Now, the ridges on Mars, which I've been saying for many, many years now, I think are burial ridges or remains of buildings, or at least they're artificial in some kind of way, like these are here. These were covered up with roofs and then buried under mud. They had wooden roofs over the top, then they had, and they were insulated and covered in mats as well to protect them from the moisture, and waterproofed, and were all covered in mud. And they sort of removed the mud and soil, and then they found a whole army of statues. Now, I'm not saying there are this many on Mars. There's less density, but what we do have, very much like the Terracotta Army, is we have animals as well. Not only things like cats and other animals, but there was a horse that I found the other day, not dissimilar to this one here. And here it is. I'll show a bit of that. Now, a lot of you would have seen this already, because if you follow my channel, you would have seen this video. Here it is. Now, a lot of people said this looks like a frog. No, you're looking at it upside down. If you look at a horse's head and ignore the eye and the rest of the head, and just look at the front of it, it does look a bit like a frog. But that's what horses look like, okay? This is a Mars horse, and it may be quite different to some of the ones we have on Earth, but it does kind of resemble some of the primitive horses we used to have on Earth. If you watch this video and follow the links below and stuff, you will see what I mean. It's like a sort of prehistoric horse almost, but it does look like a horse. And some people were saying that it looks like a frog, but no, there's no arms. If it was a frog, there'd be the front legs sticking out. At least parts of them would be still sticking out, I would imagine. But it does look a bit like a frog if you look at the other way around. But anyway, if you look at something the wrong way round, it might look like something else. This often happens with animals. In fact, if you look at just the front, the nose part of this horse, it does look a bit like an amphibian's head. Okay, so that doesn't really prove anything. That's just looking at images the wrong way round. This is upright. The reason it's upright is because that's the way up it's supposed to be. It's not accidentally ended up this way. It's that way up because that's the way it was built. It's upright, and there may be a whole horse buried under the sand and rubble here on this ridgeline. This is a horse, so we have very similar things to what we have on Earth, where you have statues often buried with horses, warrior creatures, horses, ridden by warriors, a warrior culture. There's some more horses there in the background. There's loads of animals here actually, but they're mainly soldiers. And incidentally, all these faces are different. They're all characters. A lot of them are real people, were based on real people. And what they probably did was take molds of people's faces as well, so they could get accurate faces, and all different. So every single one of these represents a different person. Now, whether they were all copied from real people or just stylized and made up, it looks like they were all actually different people. But what they seem to have had was a system where they had a generic shaped face and then would just alter it slightly. Some would have different expressions, and they were basic groups of expressions that they would then mix and match, if you catch my drift. Very complex. I won't go into it all now, but it's absolutely fascinating, and you really should look up. I've got books on this, I think, upstairs. You should look up how they did it and how they did all the different facial expressions and made them all look different. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. 6,000 of these, as well as loads of animals and chariots and that kind of thing as well. So check that out. Links will be below for this. You can read up on it in Wikipedia. On Wikipedia, I should say. So there, that was it really. There's that image there. That's the source image from Sol 25 for that one. It's quite small, I would say. This is probably about 5 inches. And this thing, this other one here, is probably about the same size. Let's go to the folder very quickly before we go. Incidentally, here's that one that everyone has put in their videos, which I found in April 2018. And some of my older finds have appeared in lots of videos and TV. Once you're on TV, on the History Channel and stuff like that, people just copy your stuff anyway, because they take clips from those programs, which they probably shouldn't do. But they get away with it if the clip is short enough. There we are. So there it is. And this made it into the international press and was the last really big sort of viral story I had, actually. Since then, I seem to have been blacklisted. But there are so many of these things. I could go on for hours and hours showing you these strange statues and figurines and figures on Mars. And incidentally, a lot of people said that the Mars jug may actually be a teacup. It may well be, but it's big. This is about 9 inches high, maybe 10 or 11 or even 12. But I estimate it to be 9, but I could be off by a couple of inches there. So this is big. Now, does that mean it's a jug that was used for pouring stuff? Some people have said it might be a teapot. It could be. I mean, we wouldn't see a spout if there was one on the other side, because it's facing away from us. Now, some people have said, well, it might mean that Martians were really big, right? Well, some of them were. As I've shown before, this video, Mars Life Uncovered, NASA Deception Busted Part 1. In this video, this skull, which is fossilized into the rock here, is huge. It's about 1.5 to 2 feet from the chin to the top. And part of it's broken off here. And it's got shark-like teeth, right? And basically would be big enough to bite your head clean off. And there are 2 of these. There's this one, which I just showed you. Right? This is the one that appears at the end of my videos, right near the end. I usually put a clip of it in. Shark-like teeth, pointed shark-like teeth, huge jaw, massive, powerful kind of jaw here. Quite large and sort of slanted eye sockets, kind of human looking. But the nose is a reversed nasal cavity, upside down. So this isn't human. This is some kind of proto-human. Now, I estimate this, the person that this belonged to, if you can call them a person, more like a giant, right, was 15 to 20 feet tall, perhaps even taller. Because we don't know the exact morphology of these things. We don't know how tall they were exactly, because it is possible that they were quite short compared to the size of the skull. In other words, they may have had very large heads and quite squat bodies. But if we add human proportions to this kind of size, this thing would have been over 15 feet, perhaps 20 feet tall. Now, what sort of size teacup would one of these you drink from? Doesn't look like a tea drinker to me. This looks like a pure carnivore that may have preyed on other people and other smaller beings on the surface and just ate them in a vicious predatory cycle. Okay, very strange indeed. So who knows about that? But what may have happened was, like on Earth, we used to have giants on Earth, like Gigantopithecus, of course, which is a predecessor of ours, that existed sort of 100 or so 1,000 years ago, I think. I don't know when they died out. I haven't read up on it in a while. But basically, they were very, very large. They were about 10 feet tall. And but died out, apparently. But they were about the same size as Bigfoot and the Yeti and that kind of thing. So perhaps there are still a few around on Earth. So there we are. That kind of puts that into context. And interesting enough, there is another example of one here, which is the same size, with flesh, mummified flesh still on it. You've got the shark-like teeth. This is heavily eroded and kind of desiccated. But here you have it. This is what kind of what one would look like, not in very, very good shape, of course, but this is kind of what one of those would have looked like in the flesh, as it were. This is obviously distorted and dried out and mummified and mineralized, probably. This may be millions of years old. So I actually think the larger species were there a very, very long time ago and died out. And when the atmosphere on Mars was largely destroyed by probably a number of massive explosions on the surface, then all the larger ones were wiped out because the atmosphere was too small and too thin, too near the ground for them to survive. So if you imagine on Mars, it's got quite low gravity, but the air density is thickest around about 3.5 feet above the ground. In other words, if you were going to survive on that surface, and if there was any oxygen remaining, or whatever it was you were breathing, some of them may breathe carbon dioxide, we don't know, then it would seem pretty obvious to me that the only things that would have survived would have been less than 3.5 feet tall, because the atmosphere is so thin that it's only thick enough that low down. Now, this would be slightly different in Gale Crater, of course, because it's 3 miles down below the surface, which means that smaller, or perhaps quite different things may have survived down in some of these deep craters, but we don't really know. We have little mummified people, and this says to me that these larger ones would have died out earlier, and the smaller survivors of a cataclysm may have gone on for many, many millions or thousands of years afterwards, and that's what we're seeing the remnants of. Little people that were sort of mummified or buried. A lot of these are burials. There are whole rows of statues, as I've shown before, like here. So it's indisputable that there are statues on Mars, and it's absolutely ridiculous for anyone to say otherwise, really, because I've shown so many. I mean, of course, you could disagree, but you're wrong. I have all the evidence right here. I've hundreds of these things: skulls, statues, artifacts, all sorts of things, even rocks with writing on, like this one. This was found by Monty Williams, this one. You can see the writing there. It looks a bit like try 647, but I doubt very much that it's English writing. They just look similar to some of our figures and letters. So we've got writing, we've got warrior statues by the dozens, okay, in Gale Crater. We have remains of creatures. We have dinosaurs or reptoid type creatures like this one. Okay, this is about 1.5 feet long, this skull. This would also have been able to probably bite your head clean off with huge kind of long jaw like that, you know. We had strange things like this, which is the Mars Lizard Man statue, which I found in the area. Very strange. Look at that. Absolutely insane with this kind of crazy forehead. Absolutely insane. Now, so there are obviously some very weird things on Mars. And they may not have all existed at the same time. Some of these may have been wiped out early on, and some of them may have survived. But there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of these things. There's the one found by Terry, the little mummy. This is only 4 inches. Stood up, this thing would have been about 8 or 9 inches. 10 at most. So, small, okay? Now, just because these things are small or very large doesn't mean there weren't humans on Mars. And a lot of the remains I found do look humanoid and look like people, okay? And very much like us, humans, but smaller. Now, whether this is actually a mummified head with hair that looks like Zeus, or a statue, I would say it's probably a statue. There's some fine detail in there, but unfortunately the images are so poor, we can't see a lot of the detail. But when we get the new rovers on Mars, we will. We'll see a lot more detail. This is one of my favourites, because these are all in the same area as well, within 50 yards, 50 metres of each other. Most of these are all within a few metres of each other. This one here, this one here, this one here. This is Hanuman, Hindu god. Look him up. Monkey god. This is one on a ridgeline. This is a grey type weird insectoid looking alien with big sort of teeth. Very scary, not like the little nice looking ones that we get down here that you see in films and in cartoons and stuff like that, and on even on food packaging you see them. Yeah, but this is a human here. This is one of my earliest finds. That's human. This one, not really sure. Proto-human looking. This one here, sort of reptilian looking. This one here, ape looking. Now look up Hanuman, because Hanuman wore a pointed helmet just like this, with a helmet that came round. So a lot of these things are wearing helmets and headgear. As for this one, looks like he's got a perm. But actually I think these are growths on the statue, or whatever it is, including fungi growing on it. So a lot of this may not have been on there. This is stuff that's been added or grown on this stuff. A lot of which may have been underwater for quite some time as well. So stuff like coral and stuff may have grown on it at some point in the past, and maybe millions of years old, some of these things. Like I said, if these were covered in sand for a million years, they would have preserved a lot of these things. That this could explain it. It's all explainable if you use a little bit of logic and common sense. And there are so many of these things. It's almost impossible to contemplate the variation of different things and different species, including kind of ape-like things like this. Someone said it looks a bit like a Homer Simpson. It does. Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. So I think I'll call it a day there, because I could go on for ages and ages talking about these things. And of course, there's so many weird things on Mars, especially in Gale Crater. And I fully expect them to find more weird things when they go to places like Jezero Crater, which is where the new Mars rover will be going. There may be buildings, and statues and all sorts of things there. Maybe not. Maybe they deliberately chose an area where they thought there wouldn't be. But there may be fossils and creatures and remains of fossilized animals and plants and stuff like this. You know, this looks like a plant. And you've got to keep an open mind, because a lot of these things really don't look like things we have down here. You've got to kind of think in between the species we have here. Some of these things look like a cross between animals and plants. You know, some of these things are very small. The scale is very different. Some of the people, it seems, on this part of Mars were very small and only about 1 foot tall or even less. But I think the main people on Mars, the humans on Mars, were around the sort of 5 to 7 foot tall, mostly around the sort of 5 to 6 foot tall mark, but some obviously taller. Judging by the size of the shoes and boots and things that I found, but most of the shoes and boots and clothing I found would fit someone much smaller. Much smaller. So there we are. There's so many of these things. It's just mind-boggling. And this is only a snapshot of some of the things I found. This isn't all of them. This is only the last year or two. It's absolutely insane. But people say, will come along and say it's pareidolia. I know some of these things may be a case of pareidolia, but I don't think most of them are. I usually rule those things out. I mean, they're just crazy things with eyes. Big googly eyes on some of them, like that one. And some of them look like they're terrified and they had a terrible time. This one here. This guy doesn't look very happy, does he? No, so are all these carvings, are all these mummies or mummified kind of fossils a mixture of the above? Some of these are very complex. Some of these are hard to get your head around. Some of them are mind-bogglingly weird. Some of them are just crazy. And people do vilify me for it and take the mick. But why wouldn't you? Especially if you're a brainwashed twat that spends all your time looking at an iPhone. You know, what would you expect from someone like that? Brainwashed idiots out there who just think that everything is fake unless someone in a white coat and a clipboard told them it was real, or someone on CNN. So there we are. So before I get any more cynical, let's call it a day. There was one image I was looking for to show you, which is this one. Gods of Mars 3. Yeah, all just pareidolia, swamp gas and weather balloons. This is obviously a weather balloon, that's obviously swamp gas, and that's pareidolia. Yeah, it's just me imagining that it's there, even though these were found by other people. This one was found by me, but these two were found by others. Sarah Runcie found this one, awesome find. Got a very strange kind of hair and a beard, like that other one I showed you a minute ago. Beards were also trendy on Mars, it seems. So thanks for watching, everybody. See you soon.